is we're going to add the camera in and be able to control the movements of it. What's useful with this is we're no longer limited to having to select all of my artwork. So in this case, I would have to zoom out and then grab my select tool and select everything, and then scale it up and down and move through, scale it up and down, and change my drawing. But there really often we don't have to do it that way. Instead, we have access to a full-featured camera that allows us to pan, tilt, zoom, and eventually even move in a 3D capacity in relation to our artwork. But today we're going to stick with 2D camera movements just to get the hang of it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my artwork and I'm going to just extend it out. If I can hit the right key, Command F5 to extend it out. So now my artwork extends out for the duration of my timeline. So there's my artwork, extends out for the basic 60 frames. Now in your actual real project, you'll be extending your artwork longer or shorter depending on what layer and what piece we're talking about. But I need my artwork so then when I add in a camera, I can work with it. Now what I'm going to do is, in the timeline, there's the plus, and I can click on that to now have options to add camera, color card, drawing group, peg, quad map, and sound. And camera is what I'm interested in right now. So I can select camera. We will see it adds a camera. It does not matter where the camera is in your layer stack. On the top, on the bottom, does not matter. You can decide where you want it on your project. It defaults to the bottom. As I'm going to animate the camera, I need to add a peg to the camera layer. So with the camera layer active, I can click on the Add Peg button, or I can go back to the plus again and choose Add Peg. Doesn't matter which one I choose. Go to the plus, or I can now just click on the Add Peg when my camera layer is selected. It's important that you select the camera layer and you add peg with the add peg button. If you try and do it with the plus, it's adding a peg, but it's not attaching it to that camera layer when you do it that way, and then it grows unhappy and says you need to change the display mode, blah, 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 blah. It's something that we could fix in the network view, but we don't want to go there right now, so just hit the add peg button. Now, once you had your camera, you could have selected your camera in the network view, and with the camera active, you could hit Command-Shift-P, and it would have added a peg for the camera in the network view the same way we added pegs to our artwork or drawing layers previously for animating. So now I've added a peg to my camera. I can select the peg layer. And while we're going to animate the peg for the camera, this is going to allow us to zoom in, it's going to allow us to zoom out, it's going to allow us to pan across our image, it's going to allow us to do all kinds of really cool camera tricks. And to do this, I want to first make sure that I don't accidentally start selecting artwork and other stuff like that. So I will go to Tool Properties, and then I will select my animation tools, and I'm going to choose the Translate tool, which is kind of the Animate Move tool, and it puts little arrows on my artwork. And in my scene planning options, there's the option of peg selection mode. It's what we used when we were animating to make sure we didn't select artwork, but only we're choosing pegs to do the animation. We're going to be consistent in what we do, and as often as possible try to animate through pegs. It's generally a better course of action. So now that I have done that, I am ready to animate my camera. So currently my camera is set here, and if I'm looking at this, I can see that I can now take this and I can move things around, and what you're noticing is while I'm moving, it seems like I'm moving my character, but in fact I'm actually moving the camera. But it's hard to see that when we're looking at it from this point of view. It's much easier if we look at this from, say, the top view, where I am now able to see my artwork and my camera. So in the top view, and I'm going to add my top view to my main window just so it's bigger. In my top view, I have this black line which shows me that is my artwork. And this yellow triangle, if I zoom out on it, represents my camera. I'll do it over here and go back to the camera view so we can see what's going on. And now if I move what the camera sees, we can now start to see how the artwork is in relation to my camera. So I can start out and move my camera really close, and I could do a nice close-up on the eyes. So I could start my project where it's zoomed in on the eyes. After 10 frames, I recommend that you then, if I animate it, we'll add in a keyframe, but it's only adding in a keyframe for translate, and we'll see that happen if I just click and move the camera. And we will see now, I have now created motion. Now if I go somewhere else in time, I can move, and it creates motion. So when we're moving the camera in the top view, if I grab on the arrows, it doesn't change the relation of the camera to the artwork, but it may move it out of the way so I'm not bothered by what I see. Where that registration or pivot point is will matter when I'm rotating, if I choose to rotate a camera. So then that does come into play. But what I'm concerned about, by clicking anywhere but on the arrows, I can now push the camera closer to the subject or pull the camera further away. The black line being the subject, the arrows representing the character. And then I can, in my camera view, I can now adjust my position from a side-to-side relationship. So I'm moving the camera one side or to the other. And I can do all of this in my top view. And once you grow used to it, it makes sense that as you move the camera to the right, your subject goes to the left, because it follows what we would see in the physical world. So we start to gain some understanding of how that is working. And now when I look at my timeline, I can see how I'm able to move to those new positions. Now, that's the basic camera movements that we can do. We also do have a side view we can choose. And when I have the side view is very much like the top view, except it doesn't help when I can't see my camera. So we'll put the side view over here. So now I have a side view. Actually, we'll put a top view down here then. So now we have top and side, so we can see both. This is where you wish for the double 27-inch monitor, so you have tons of room to spread all of your artwork out. So now when I have the top view there, my side view is here, and I can see with the side view, so it's moving similar on my different axes. Pulling the camera up, pushing the camera, moving the camera up or down, moving the camera side to side. So sometimes it's useful to have top and side as you're trying to align things. When it's one camera, one element, it's generally not that big a deal. But when we start adding in other elements and adjusting their positions in space to each other, then it sometimes can become something we're interested in exploring and figuring out how those relationships work. But we will get there in a little bit. Now, currently I've now zoomed out, I've moved over. Now if I go over to this point right here and decide that I want to do a pan across my subject so I can move them across the frame, so we can see how now I can just do a basic pan across. So instead of having to change the artwork, we're now able to change the relationship of the camera to the artwork. And with one element, it's not that big a deal, though this is much faster than grabbing the artwork and sizing it up and sizing it down. And remember, the artwork can be animating while you're doing this, so this could be a whole layer of animation that you have a character walking, you have the character talking, they're waving their arms, they're doing calisthenics, whatever the case may be. And then we can now just animate the camera on them versus having to keep moving them while we're animating them, which then sometimes gets to be fairly problematic. So if we've worked in Flash and things like that, that would really suck to be able to do both an animated character and then simulate this camera movement. Now, if I decide that once I've reached and panned across the stage here, then if I want to hold that for a little bit and then go to a new position, and now on this new position I'm going to be zoomed in, but as I do that, I don't want to have the camera moving, I just want it to jump. Well, these are motion keyframes. We can see the black line is indicating the computer is interpolating or tweening for us, but we can turn on and off that interpolation, that tweening, kind of as we see fit. We can turn it off, we can turn it back on, we can change our mind, and it's all good. So if I click on this frame, I'll notice that there are two icons up here. One icon is for my motion keyframe. It's got the little kind of S or curved line between it. And the other icon is a stop motion keyframe. Now, if those buttons do not show up in your timeline or in your toolbar, that would be under Windows, Toolbar, and then Timeline View. So Windows, Toolbar, Timeline View, it brings up all of these buttons that correspond to the timeline. So most Windows, just like we looked before, Network has a set of buttons we can pull up. So under Window, then we can choose Toolbars, Network View, so you can add something to your network view. We added the buttons to our timeline view. So currently this is a motion keyframe, or this is a motion keyframe. But if we want to convert it, so it's no longer a motion keyframe, we just click on it. It's now a stop motion keyframe. You can see the tweening disappeared. So now I will go to here, and now it holds, and now it jumps to that new position. If I wanted to go from here and jump to the close-up, click on that keyframe, say it's a stop motion keyframe, gets rid of the tweening. Now if I decide I want it back, I click, and now it comes back. So you can easily turn it on and off. Now we're close up here, and now I'm going to go from the eyes to the mouth. So I'm going to modify the position of my artwork here. I'm going to pull the camera back a little bit. And now it's reanimating that. Notice how it's using a motion versus a stop motion. So it creates that motion or that tweening effect. But if I didn't want that, I could now click here and say it's a stop motion. Now that goes away. So now that I have a camera working, it's moving, got motion, stop motion keyframes. And remember, you can always trade them back and forth using the icons down here. Now I had dude here. Now I can add in a new drawing layer for dude 2. And dude 2 will be, I need to choose an appropriate drawing tool for it so I can draw. And dude 2 only has one eye, which is why he kind of looks a little bit grumpy. Highly recommended. Always make sure that you're naming your layers and working with that. Now, as we look at our layers, we will see that now the camera is responding. Well, I will need to extend out his layer as well, so I can extend it using F5. So what I see in my camera view is now applying to both of my characters. So we can see that these characters have different qualities and are now showing up. The camera's affecting both of them. So the camera didn't only affect the round green head, but it also affects purple head, whose body, when I'm zoomed out, apparently he needs something, or he's floating. He doesn't have a body. Besides characters, I may have a background layer, so I'm going to just put in a artwork layer and so if I have a background section, it's been filled, we'll notice that now my background is on top, so it obscures what's there, so probably do need to pull it down so it's behind the other layers. And again, we can see how all of those layers are stacked up, and then as the camera moves, we're able to see that the camera is now, again, make sure that layers are extending properly. Back to frame 1, extend out. So, and apparently I need to adjust the size of my background here, because we can see it's not fully fitting on frame.
It's pretty artistic.
Dude 2 is going to animate. I can give Dude 2 a peg layer. I'll collapse Dude 2's position. Now I can go position Dude 2, so he's going to start off screen. And then as the camera moves out, I want him to move on screen. So we can combine character movement with camera movement to see how we're able to create both. And now he's going to stay over there. He needs to move back. We miss him. He's off frame, so we'll move him back. Now, while the camera is parked, elements can be moving. So as you go to animate, now this concept of using motion and stop motion keyframes works for artwork as well. So your artwork doesn't always have to have a motion keyframe, but it can have that stop motion, just like what I applied to the camera. So now if he's over here, he's not in the field of view of the camera. Make that a stop motion keyframe. Go here, pull him back. He's trying to get in the picture. It's disappeared, and boom, he's back. When you're working with this, you do run into the problem sometimes that your artwork, especially background elements, are not going to be of the correct size, so it's hard to see what is going on with it. So as we, now that the file's working again, one thing that we can run into problems that we notice that, okay, as we move our artwork around, we have some issues. And if you're going to zoom way in to a scene, there needs to be enough data for it to zoom out so things get small in relation to the camera. If you find your backgrounds aren't big enough, then you need to make them bigger. So you may need to make the artwork larger than you were thinking for your base kind of background elements, because we can't just lock something and say, now this doesn't move. If it is a flat color, then instead of using something like a background layer like that, what we could do is you can add in a color card, which gives you a solid color for your background. Color cards can be set at whatever color you want by double clicking on them and choosing some other color. So I could choose some color like this, and those little dots we see only show up when the color card layer is active. Otherwise we see that it's not there. So if you know it's solid color you're looking for, whether it's white or gray. Otherwise, by default, it uses black, and that black happens to actually be transparent if you render your video out with transparency enabled. So if you do a H.264 QuickTime with an alpha channel, or a .mov file with an alpha channel, so it's doing 24-bit color plus alpha, you can have a transparent background video, so you can composite it on top of other artwork in your video editor of choice or onto a web page or something like that. So by default, when you create the movie file, it will show up with black if you don't have artwork there. And that black is actually transparent. When I add a color card, that color card is now showing up, and in this case it's an obnoxious pink color, but that guarantees that when I animate around it, it will completely and always fill my screen. I'm going to just turn that off because wrong button. It's painful to look at. Now if I have my background layer that I had up before, one thing that I can do is we can see that here's the background layer in relation to the camera. Now we can now take layers, and not just our artwork layers. I'm just going to pull this up a little bit more so I can see all my layers. So not just my artwork layers, and I'm going to make this one bigger, but I also have the option of adjusting the position of my layers as it relates to their space in 3D, or their Z space. Because currently we can see all of my layers are stacked right here. I'm just going to move this out of the way so I can just see what's going on. So I have each one of these layers that are stacked right here. And if I want to adjust them or move them, I can do so by using the translate tool. So I can now grab my background, or I can go to its peg, and I can now move that. And we can see as it moves further from the cameras, we'll notice how it's shrinking in relation to the camera. So we see how it got really, really small. But if I decide that I don't want my background layer to do that, there's an option called maintain size, and now I can adjust its position in relation to the camera. So I can say I want my background to be really big in relation to the camera. Now I can pull it out. Now we notice it didn't change view on screen here, but when I pulled it out in relation to the camera, we can see how it kept scaling it. So it effectively made it bigger as it went into the background, so that I didn't have to put it back there and then try to make the artwork bigger and go, oh crap, now it's super tiny. So if you draw clouds and mountains and trees and houses and other things that you want to be in the background, instead of having to draw them really, really, really big and then shoving them back and letting them shrink, you can draw them small and then use maintain size and adjust their position compared to the other elements. So now when I go to animate the camera, we will see that it now is able to, let me undo the camera animation there a little bit, and apparently it's, so it seems that now I've resurrected my field of vision of my camera in relation to my artwork. I'm going to go back to my normal translate tool, and now we can see that the background is suitably big. So as I zoom out, zoom in, because I use maintain size on it, it does not affect it. So now as I animate, I'm not going to run out of background any longer. Now it is important, I can see at this point that I'm actually running the camera too close, so then I've lost that one character. But we can certainly move things, or I can move the camera back a little bit. If I want to be zoomed in that far, I can always grab a character and adjust the character. Is now the camera moved too far in relation to the character here. So we'll notice that the layer order as it shows up on the side of the screen here, when I move that character and go past the background, we can see how it disappears. And we can see it changes in that order. That shows me the Z order of the layers. So if I have a bunch of layers for each of my characters, there's my Z order for them. So what is back, then middle, then front? So if I select this character, we can move its position. So if I move it behind the background, move it in front of the background. So we're able to affect the Z positioning of our elements. So we can now animate and zoom in here. So we can see here the camera is the cone. Then I have character and I have character. And as I move them, we can see I'm effectively changing their position as it fits in the frame, but also what's behind or what's in front. Notice as I'm doing this, my layer orders haven't changed at all. So my layers here, dude 2, and then dude. Dude 2, then dude. So they're not changing around, even though visually we see a change occurring. Which can be, sometimes you will run into issues where you animate and a character is behind something, tree, shrub, window, wall, some object. You know, like it's not working and their Z ordering got screwed up, not their ordering of their layers. So we're able to translate or move things. I'm in the top view here. So I'm able to, from above, effectively I'm looking at each one of my characters. Here's my background, here's my characters. The camera is the apex of this cone or triangle. Now I can decide to take this character and pull it closer to the camera, push it further away. I can go grab this character and I can now pull that one closer to the camera. And notice if I cross in front, it's now on top. Put it behind, it's there. Whoa, whoa, whoa. And that's now, I can completely animate this as we work our way through. So there's a tremendous amount of flexibility of, I can animate the camera, but because I used maintain size on the background, we no longer have to worry about the background disappearing because I shoved it far enough back with maintain size.